Hi everyone, it's Michael here again, and I've got another short course for you, and this one is going to be fun. The topic is my biggest LEGO Serious Play mistakes. And boy, have I got some doozies for you. So I share a lot of these big and little mistakes that I've made in my courses and my workshops. I share with people these experiences and these stories. And I thought, well, why not put it all together into a little video and share it more widely so that hopefully you get some benefit from it. So when I reflect back on my LEGO Serious Play journey, it's been a lot of trial and error. So a big reason why I do what I do, why I teach people and why I share some of this stuff and why I teach the method the way I do is because I don't want you to have that same experience of, oh, that mistake, or, maybe a shortcut to bypass that angst that I had. Now, of course, you'll make your own mistakes and you'll make different ones. But I'm hoping that through things like my book, my courses, and these videos that you can at least recognize some of the mistakes as they're coming up and go, oh, okay, so Michael experienced this as well. And then maybe you can figure out ways to navigate it a little better than I did. But without further ado, let's get into it. I've got some slides to take us through some of my biggest LEGO Serious Play mistakes. So let me get that up. All right, so my biggest mistakes. I'm going to start off with my biggest one, and then I'm going to go through a whole bunch of little ones as well that have come over. Now, obviously, with all of this, it's about the learnings you take from it. And so I'm going to go through, I'm going to share the stories, some of the things that happened and what I took away from it. So let me tell you about my biggest mistake with my LEGO Serious Play session. And it was my second session. So this was about 10 years ago now, all the way back. My first one was fantastic. I got invited up to a tropical island with a team from my old work, and there was this day. Oh, it was just brilliant. And then I came back and I did this second session. Now, immediately there were a whole bunch of red flags, and when I tell you these red flags, you're going to laugh. But at the time, I was like, it's my second session. They're paying me. I want to do it. I sort of knew the red flags, but let's get into it. So what was it? It was a session with a senior leadership group. So it was, CEO, CIO of a big company, like hundreds of millions of dollars company. So everyone was there. I think we had 12 people all up from the senior leadership team. And they wanted a couple-hour session and around a communication issue, so communication sort of problems. And it was part of a bigger day, and this is where the red flags start. So it was a 2-day conference they were at, all together. It was at a yacht club, and I had the dubious spot of 3:30 to 5:30 on a Friday afternoon at the end of the 2 days. They said, bring in Michael and do the session then. And I was like, oh, okay, not the best time to do LEGO Serious Play. You generally want to do it in the mornings. But okay, well, let's do it. So that happened. I came into the session. We had 12 people. This is my second session, and I, freshly out of learning the method. And so I was doing some warm-ups and some individual models, and we had 12 people, and I was doing all 12 people at once because no one had told me that, you probably want to limit your group size to smaller groups. And so we're doing 12, and I realized by like share 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 that everyone was like, the energy was flagging. And it's because the group was too big. And the lesson I learned from that is 12 is too big, and even 10 is too big. So most of my sessions now are tables of 6, because in facilitator world, that is just a beautiful number. It's nice and intimate, but it's not too big, so people can't hide. So I learned a good lesson there to limit yourself to 5 or 6 people per table. And look, you can stretch that to 7. I probably wouldn't go 8 or 9, but that was a good lesson. Another thing that I learned was I had them in a bit like it was set up in a big U shape. And so it was like people were looking over there, like trying to see someone's model as they were sharing it. And I realized very quickly that we needed to get on to smaller tables and smaller groups. So it felt a bit more intimate and people could see that. So luckily I adjusted in session. We broke up into smaller groups. They were on separate tables, and we continued on. But it was all going quite well until we got to the group model at the end. And I decided to do the group model all together, all 12 of us. So we brought our models together and people were building them together. And then the CEO, who had been part of the session and was, seemed fine to be doing it, about halfway through the sort of build, he said, everyone, we're all standing around. He's like, everyone, stop, stop, stop. I think we're making this too complicated. Here's what I think the problem is. And he proceeded to spend like 5-10 minutes just telling us what the problem was from his perspective. So I call that the CEO torpedo. Now, I was a very young facilitator back then, quite inexperienced. And so I was just like, dumbstruck. I was like, oh my God, what is happening here? And so the CEO just went on these rants, and everyone was, you could see the magic just die, as you know, with Lego Series Play, it's about everyone expressing themselves, and suddenly the CEO is just being this dominating character. And so what was interesting, it went further on. Like, what I should have done at that point is I should have jumped in and said, that's nice, Mr. CEO, let's get back to the bricks. Let's, like, what does everyone else think, and do that. And that's what I would do now. But back then I was just like almost dumbstruck. But it got better. So what happened was, I had a person who was one of the people that had sort of got me in to do this job. She was there as an observer, which I realize now that I shouldn't, you know, with Lego Series Play, you really shouldn't have observers. People should either be facilitating with you, or they should be in the process. They really should be there taking notes and watching. But anyway, she jumped in and she started giving her opinion as well. And I was just like, oh my God, what's happening here? Anyway, so that conversation sort of petered out. We decided to wrap it up there, and everyone went off to the bar afterwards at 5:30. And I awkwardly hung around. It wasn't that nice, and then I left. And so what was interesting about that whole situation was, about a couple of months later, I learned that there were quite a few people from that 12, so I think it was like 2 or 3, decided to leave the organization. And it was interesting because what it brought out was that this communication problem was actually the CEO and the way he was managing that leadership team. So a few people left. It probably wasn't the outcome they were after, but I look back on it and think that was a good outcome, because if Lego Series Play does nothing else, it opens people up, and you get to see the true self. And in that situation, it was the true CEO. So probably not what we expected, and lots of things I could have done better. But interesting outcome in the end. Another thing that I took away from it was, I actually don't like working with senior leaders. So look, Lego Series Play works fantastically well with any group, and you know, it was designed for senior leaders and strategy. But I just learned as a facilitator, and partially because of this experience, I just don't like working with senior leaders, so CEOs and CFOs. And part of it, I think, is because that doesn't fit my facilitation style. And also, there's a bigger variation in whether they have a sort of growth open mindset or a more fixed closed mindset. And I just find at senior levels, there's probably more, it's a generalization, but it's probably more fixed and closed, because they were successful and they got there because of this particular style of thinking. And so when you challenge them with a method like Lego Serious Play, more often than not, they're a little thrown by it, and you get some big egos and big personalities coming out. So I just learned, for a whole bunch of reasons, that I like to work with the middle of an organization, with managers and their teams. And look, the great thing about it is there's more of them to work with. And I just feel like there's more growth mindset, and Lego Series Play is perhaps more well received. And there's definitely more opportunities out in the market for that. So anyway, that was a huge learning lesson from my second session. I hope you took something away from that. If nothing else, it was a good story. One other sort of mistake I want to talk about, and then a whole bunch of little ones. So there was this session I ran with a university where it was 40 people, and we were running a session. It was about 2 hours. And we had a whole range of people in there, everyone from sort of PhD candidates and even some undergrads, I think, to academic staff, to admin staff from this department. And they're all mingled up. And what we did was, it was all going fine. And then one gentleman jumped up off the table, and he said to me, sort of halfway through a build, "Oh, I've got to go." And I was like, "Oh, okay. You know, I didn't know about that, but that's fine." So he wandered out. But then within a couple of minutes, maybe about 5 minutes, he came back with a sort of takeaway coffee that he'd got. And he was just wandering around looking at everyone. And I went up to him and I said, "I thought you had to go." And he's like, "Oh, no, I just didn't want to do it anymore." And so I said to him, "Look, well, if you're in the room, you have to be doing it, or you have to just take your coffee out and go away." And what I learned from that, so it wasn't really a mistake. It was more an interesting observation where I think for him, because he was an academic, it really leveled the playing field, Lego Serious Play. And so he was sitting there with people that he was supervising in PhD, and probably people in the admin area that he was potentially bossing around all day. And so what I found was that by bringing everyone down to the same level, he felt a bit confronted by that. So it was a bit of a status thing for him, and he didn't want to play. Now, what's interesting with that is that, like, it is a level playing field with Lego Serious Play. And I'm actually surprised that doesn't happen more often. So that was literally one guy in like hundreds and thousands of people that I've done. And so that was really interesting, just something to keep in mind around the odd case where we are playing with people's status and how they view each other. And so that was an interesting one. Maybe not a mistake, but definitely interesting learning. All right, let's rattle through a whole bunch of other little ones. The first one is this great saying by my friend Joel, and it's "Don't water rocks." And one of the mistakes I made was way back at the start of Lego Serious Play was trying to convince people to do it. So I would get a potential client and I'd work really hard to try and convince them and spend lots of time. And what we found was with this Don't Water Rocks is they're the rocks. They're not going to move. They're not going to get involved. It's just too much effort. So don't waste your precious water watering them and helping them to grow, because they won't. They're rocks. So my mistake was spending too much time on people who are not wanting to do this. So what I've learned now is just go on to someone else that does. It's better to spend your time finding other people that want to do Lego Serious Play, because there are plenty of them out there. Another mistake that I made early on was in the design side of Lego Serious Play, and that was about time. So it was all these shiny new activities, everything from, oh, there's connections and there's all this fancy stuff we can do with Lego Serious Play. And in the end, it just took up too much time. I just found that I was rushing through trying to fit everything that I thought needed to be in there. So what I've learned, the mistake I made around time was, and the thing I learned was just less activities, let it breathe, let more time for sharing, more time for insights, more time for reflection. So now I just use things like individual models. I then go to a group model or a shared model or a landscape. And so it really is just about that time. It's about letting things breathe. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I made early on. Another mistake, well, not so much a mistake, but a really interesting observation was, as I was starting sessions, I used to get some very nervous leaders. And so what would happen is I would get hired in by, the head of HR or the manager, and, it might be like a group of 20 or 30 people. And then the leader would come in and they would do an intro. They would sort of, welcome the day and all that sort of stuff. And then they would say, I had this happen a few times. They would say things like, well, I don't know how this next session with the Lego is going to go, and I didn't organize it, so-and-so did. And so it was like an ass covering thing. They're like, well, if this goes bad, it wasn't me. And the first time someone said that, I was a little surprised. And the second time I heard a leader say that, I'm like, oh, okay, it's pretty funny. And I just laugh it off. Because what usually happens is, the session is great. Afterwards, it's always like, oh, wasn't that a great session? And so I've learned that they're just nervous leaders and they want to sort of distance themselves from the potential of this, strange new method going wrong. So anyway, if you see that, just laugh it off, because senior leaders, yeah, sometimes they're nervous, and it's best to just roll on and show them what can be done. And moving on to the next mistake, one of the things that when I learned Lego Serious Play was the warm-up, and it was very long. It was like an hour and a half. We did all these activities. I think that's traditionally how it was done and taught to many, many people. But I guess the mistake was it just takes too long. You don't have an hour and a half. Like, most of my sessions are 2 hours. And if I'm going to fit Lego Serious Play into that, I need to find a shorter way to do it. And so I've compressed that down with my Build a Tower with You in it activity. That's in my book you can find. I've compressed that all the way down to maybe like 25, 30 minutes is probably the minimum you can do in terms of a really proper solid warm-up. So one of the mistakes early on I made was trying to go for too long a warm-up, and we've compressed that down, which has been great. Some of the other mistakes, I noticed early on people building very literally. And so they would build their Lego and they would build a very literal tower, or, and one thing I learned is that the power of Lego Serious Play comes from metaphors. And so I really ramped up the metaphor examples, and I just throw lots of metaphor examples. I give lots of examples. I get them to practice lots of metaphors and things like that. And I've just found that's been really useful for then later on, when they start to build themselves properly and the real questions, they just tap into that metaphorical thinking. And that's really where the power and the creativity of Lego Serious Play comes from. It's from metaphor. It's from relating one thing to another. And that's how we bring things across, and creativity sort of flows. There's connection. And so that's one mistake I made, was not emphasizing that enough. And that led to a lot of very literal building. So if you can, ramp up your metaphors and your examples. Another mistake that I made was I went too same. And what I mean by that is I used to do like individual model, individual model, individual model, and it got a bit samey. It was just like, oh, we're doing another individual model. And so what I've learned is variety in activities is the key. So I will always do an individual model, and then I'll go to a group model, say like a shared model. And then I might go back to an individual model, but I might do a thing called rapid building, where instead of 5 minutes, like we did earlier, I'll do 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. And then we'll go to a landscape. And so in the end, in a 2-hour, 3-hour session, they're almost not doing the same activity ever again. Like, it's a big individual model build. Then we do a group shared model, and then we do rapid sort of little ones, and then there's a landscape. And that variety, I think, keeps it fresh as well, rather than one thing I learned was just like you do like this series of individual models can get a bit boring. Not boring, but they're sort of like, oh, okay, we're just doing this again. So just variety is fantastic. Speaking of group models, one of the mistakes or things that I saw early on with group models is, particularly shared models, is the ability for group dynamics to come back in. So I really remember this one example where because of individual models, everyone gets their own turn and you don't see the dominating person. But then we went to a group model and this person just started to dominate and they came out and like, oh, we should do this and this and this. So that's, you know, I wasn't really prepared for that, and it was a mistake I made. But now I'm very wary of shared models and group dynamics, and to the point where I'll ask people, okay, so we've heard a lot from, you know, these people, what about the quieter ones, or someone who hasn't said a lot, or there's lots of different tricks you can do to change those group dynamics. So just be wary of those group dynamics. One of the other mistakes that I made early on was about endings. So no one really told me how to properly end a LEGO Series play session. There's sort of no real official way to do it. And so it sort of petered out towards the end. It was a nice conversation, but we didn't really sharpen it up and focus it. And so that's a mistake that I made that I don't do now. I'm very focused on like allowing enough time at the end and allowing, you know, really focusing towards actions, change. What are you taking away on that? And so that's what I really drive towards at the end of my sessions. Because in the end, the Lego is just the middle part of the session. You really want to make sure you get to the point or sharpen it up so they can take stuff out of the room. So that was a mistake I made early on. Oh, another one. Geez, there's a lot of these, isn't there? The last one was accountability. So one of the mistakes I made early on was I would do a session. People would produce these sort of outputs and they would produce these actions. And then I would go away and write a report, like a good little facilitator. Like I would collate it, I'd write a report, I'd give some advice, and I'd hand it back. And nothing was really ever done with that stuff. And so what I've learned is that I push accountability in the session down to the people who are going to be doing this stuff. So when I walk out of the room, I don't want to be doing a report. I want everyone else in the room to be walking out with at least one or two actions or a project plan, accountability, dates, and knowing what they need to do. So I think that mistake of, you know, being a bit softer on accountability and letting the facilitator go away and, you know, come back, that just doesn't work. I just don't think it's a good way to do things. And so really drive accountability back to the people in the room. So look, me as a facilitator, I walk away and like I can give advice and I can provide photos and all that sort of stuff. But in the end, they need, like they build it, they own it, they need to make the changes. And so I'm really big on that. Whew, let me have a drink. That was big. That was a lot of mistakes. But let me wrap it all up by saying, in the end, LEGO Series Play and your learnings about it and you're getting better at it, it's about trial and error. So the best thing to do is just do it. I mean, part of the reason why I provide all this information and provide all these things is so that your first few experiences are totally fine and you won't have the big mistakes that I made. You might have little ones and that's fine. And I'm sure you'll see other ones. I mean, a lot of mine come from doing so many sessions that I see so many different things. But I've built those all back into the method. And that's what I think you should do as well. So realize that your first session is not going to be as good as your second session, which is not going to be as good as your third session. As you go along and you do a better third one and a better fourth one, you just start to build up a practice about how to do LEGO Series Play. And you get these war stories, these mistake stories, and you just get better and better at it. And the thing that I always say to myself, that the session you're providing, this LEGO Series Play session, it's always going to be better than a non-LEGO Series Play session. So no matter what happens and comes out of it, it's always going to be better. So just do it. And the best thing to do is remember to reflect on it. So I always sit back afterwards and reflect. So what went well? What can I learn from this? And what can I roll back into my practice? So I roll it into the methods. There's so many things in the way I teach have been from the mistakes and the errors that I've seen. And so I build them into the method. And that's what you should do too. To say, okay, so next time I'm going to be more wary of this, or next time I'm going to emphasize this in the warm-up and things like that. And so in the end, you build up, you know, that sort of resilience around LEGO Series Play and your practice of it. Anyway, I've gone on too long. So many fun stories. Hopefully you got something out of it. And I'm just going to keep doing these videos, keep providing you with interesting information. If you are wanting to share your mistake, or if you want to ask something else, feel free in the comments below, do that and I'll reply to it. But otherwise, keep an eye out for the next short course video. I'm thinking I'm going to do it on the duck activity. And now I don't like the duck, and so that surprises a lot of people. So I might do that next one on the duck and why I don't like the duck. Another controversial topic. Anyway, it's been fun. I hope you've learned something from all these mistakes that I've made over the years. And yeah, good luck with your next sessions. Build all this knowledge in, and I can't wait to hear all the stuff that you do. Bye.